So we're going to discuss today rumors that Joe Manchin is going to leave the Democratic Party. And as of right now, there is no confirmation. In fact, Tim Pool made a video, his main video for today, where he made it seem as if it was a confirmed fact. But as you probably know from following the news many times, the media jumps the gun. They make a conclusion before anything has actually happened, or based on misinformation, or on opinion, or innuendo. And it doesn't turn out to be true. So as of right now, this hasn't really happened, and Joe Manchin is denying that he would abandon the Democratic Party. It really boils down to some sort of story with Mother Jones magazine claiming that Manchin is planning to leave the Democratic Party. And his response was that it is BS. And he also said, I have no control of the rumors, guys. Now, let me tell you what the fallout of that happening would be if it was to happen, and what I think the likelihood is of it actually occurring. The reason that the Manchin defection would be a major story is that every once in a while, when the Senate or the House is really teetering on the edge of a balance between the two largest parties, there is a senator or member of the House who decides that they're going to take advantage of this situation. It's a political calculation, and basically act as the kingmaker in many circumstances. And we're actually in a perfect situation for that. When the Senate is 50-50, which it already is, it's technically 50 to 48 in favor of the Republicans with two independents, but the two independents are de facto Democrats, uh, Bernie Sanders and Angus King, who's the senator from Maine. So, um, there could always be a senator who is on one side or the other who will tip the balance for legislation. Now, of course, as you well know, there's another senator who serves to break ties, and that's the vice president of the U.S., Kamala Harris. But in reality, Manchin's behavior in this current Senate session has made Harris's position as the tie-breaking vote not as useful as one would think. He's, for example, refused to eliminate the filibuster. Him and Kirsten Sinema, by the way. He's also refused to back the big spending bill. He's refused to confirm the ATF nominee David Chipman. With um, that move, he was also backed up by a small group of other Democratic senators from New Hampshire and Montana, and I think also Sinema. So there is a small group of more centrist Democratic senators, and then of course him and Sinema are the most obstinate ones. They are not really going along with a lot of elements of the Biden agenda. So his defection to become an independent would be a disaster for the Democratic Party because they really have not accomplished much in this Senate session that they can hold their hat on, right? And I'm not trying to take a side in this video, right? You all know my politics, but I just want to just explain this a little bit from the side, and then talk a little bit about whether I think it will happen. If Joe Manchin defects and says that he's an independent, it could affect, for example, who will be the Senate Majority Leader, right? So at the moment, the Senate Majority Leader is Chuck Schumer by virtue of the tie-breaking vote. But if Manchin says, well, I'm not really going to vote for Schumer to be the Senate Majority Leader anymore, then that Senate Majority Leader status is meaningless. It actually effectively goes back to whoever can get the most votes or whoever can get a majority. And at that point, you you could actually see either Mitch McConnell become majority leader again. Not that that really is a great thing at all. Um, I mean, you can really see that Mitch McConnell is a creature unto himself and unto his personal friends, not beholden to Americans as a whole. Or he could hold out and say, hey, I don't want either of these people, Schumer or McConnell. I'd like a compromise candidate. He could even theoretically like pick the majority leader. He could say, "Oh, I'm just going to vote for myself." So Joe Manchin could cause either chaos or a new order in the Senate. Theoretically, the Republicans could take control by virtue of having the majority leader of all the committees, and that would be a disaster for the Biden administration and for the Democrats. So I do understand why there are people who are partisan Democrats or just support the Democrats philosophically being very mad at him for this because he was, after all, elected as one, and he was campaigning his entire life saying that he is a good friend of President Obama and now President Biden as well, who I think he served in. I don't know if he served in the Senate with him, but I do know that Biden was vice president, or was in the Senate when Manchin was governor of Virginia. They certainly know each other well, especially at this point. Um, so yeah, it's not surprising that they would be extremely pissed off at him, and that he's basically ruining their lives at this point. Now, does this make Manchin, a laudable politician? I think that's a very hard question to answer. If you live in West Virginia, if you are a person who is a big supporter of the Second Amendment, if you're a person who supports, for example, the pro-life agenda, I think you have to thank Manchin for a number of things, because he is holding back a number of the more intrusive aspects of the Biden agenda, especially concerning the economy, especially concerning electoral reform, as the Democrats would call it, which I think is actually wrecking the electoral system. So Manchin's threat to leave the Democratic Party, I think, um, for many Americans, it actually constitutes what John F. Kennedy would have called a profile in courage. That you're taking your position and you're acting above your narrow political interest. But some people would say it is his narrow political interest. He could never get elected in West Virginia were he to. He could never get reelected, I should say, in West Virginia if he were to back the whole Biden agenda. It's very unpopular there. I was very surprised that West Virginians reelected Manchin in 2018, given the fact that they know that many of these politicians, who, they're very opportunistic. I think Joe Manchin is very opportunistic. His daughter is uh, a pharmaceutical CEO. She is basically making a lot of money through her heavily regulated company. And many people are thinking that it's thanks to Manchin that she has her status and that she's actually at that company, because that company, Mylan, has basically a monopoly on EpiPens. So that's one of the reasons that they consider him to be a rank opportunist. His vote on Kavanaugh, many people see that as opportunism. He's basically a person who, especially if you're on the left now, you consider to be for sale. He's very beholden to big oil and big and coal interests, right? And I'm not one of these climate change fanatics, but I do think you should at least keep your distance from oil and fossil fuel lobbyists if you want to be transparent about your votes on certain issues regarding energy policy, right? So I think I've given a fair and balanced view of Manchin's career and what his motivations might be. Now, what's the likelihood of this happening? Um, for many years, I've said that this is something that is always on the table, but there's a reason Manchin remains in the Democratic Party, and that's that he is basically able to be a part of the real power system. The real power system, I think, is more um, accommodating to Democrats than to Republicans, right? Especially if you consider the fact that we're seeing right now the military basically backing this Biden government, even though they are weakening the actual performance of the military because these people are careerists. So why has Manchin always remained a Democrat? Because he's always been a careerist. So his career has always been, um, it's always been progressed owing to his loyalty to the Democratic Party. So as long as as being a Democrat benefits Joe Manchin personally and in terms of his his political power, I think he's going to remain a Democrat. And I think that uh, he doesn't necessarily have to defect in order to be happy with himself. All he has to all he has to do is continue to vote the way he wants to vote, and basically he becomes the most powerful senator in Washington, regardless of who's majority leader, regardless of who is, in the White House, regardless of any of those things. He has a very powerful position. Now that powerful position also gets him many enemies. There were people who, if I remember correctly, they either canoed or kayaked to his houseboat in Washington D.C. in order to get him to support the $3.5 trillion spending bill. People are going to consistently pursue him. So my opinion is that if it becomes enough of a nuisance personally to him, and if it doesn't really justify the cost of, of being a Democrat to remain one, yeah, he could flip and just say, no, I don't think he's going to flip to be a Republican, but that does happen. But yeah, he could flip to say he's an independent. And I think some of these activists would basically throw their hands up and say, well, what are we supposed to do now? Because the fact is that so long as he's a Democrat, theoretically they have a chance of unseating him through a primary. But if he doesn't run as a Democrat in the primary, he can run simply as an independent. He has the name recognition. He has more name recognition than anyone now because he's basically been vilified by every progressive publication in the country. So Joe Manchin, I think, he has a number of choices ahead of him. Yes, I think he could easily remain a Democrat. And until he says otherwise, I think he's going to remain a Democrat. So I think it's not really a great idea that Tim Pool basically, uh, he acted as if what the Mother Jones article is true, even though there's no confirmation yet. Now, on the other hand, the focus on him and the fact that he is basically standing athwart the what's the expression, standing in the way of progress, I guess is the way they would put it, every single time. And they just seem to get more and more mad and antagonize him and everything, whether it's Bernie Sanders or whether it's these activists paddling to his houseboat, which which is but I think it is illegal because the houseboat does constitute a castle. So um, yeah, he like the more pressure they put on, the more desperate this pressure becomes. It becomes more likely, right? Things do change. I think in his mind, maybe Manchin has always wanted to remain a Democrat because maybe he doesn't get along like personally with people on the Republican side, even though his politics are sometimes closer to theirs. Um, but yeah, it would be a major issue. It would also start to raise questions of whether Cinema would remain a Democrat. She could very well go and say, "Hey, this party has kind of become a little bit of a drag. I'm going to be an independent too." But I think in her case, it doesn't make as much sense because Arizona, which is her state, is a much more middle of the road state. She has an easier chance of getting elected as a Democrat than Joe Manchin does. I think Joe Manchin while he's making very good political moves for himself as a Democrat, it's becoming harder and harder to survive in West Virginia. It's become almost exclusively dominated by Republicans, largely because of Obama and the war on coal, um, which again I think is a very nuanced topic. So that's about it. I don't think he has officially done anything as of my last check, and I think Tim Pool should have waited to actually confirm. But that's about it. Please like, share, and subscribe. You can also find me on Gab and Minds. Oops. You can find me. Let me see here. Do I have that graphic? Nope. Anyway, you can find me on Gab, Minds, BitChute, uh, on Odyssey, as well as Rumble. Those are all video hosting places. So the latter three I host videos on. You can support me through Subscribestar. You can also, if you so choose, join my newsletter, which is in the description, and also my Telegram channel if you just want to chat and comment on stories that I share throughout the day. And hopefully I'll be sharing this video as well. Have a great day.